Here we go, the official show on the Fish Stripes podcast channel. This is our Derek Jeter emergency pod edition with Jeter out as the Marlins chief executive officer. I am Ely Sussman, the managing editor of Fish Stripes here on Monday, on a day where we were anticipating a big news story, but not quite the one that we were expecting. And in fact, in my mind, I wonder if it's not a coincidence that this news comes out on the day where Major League Baseball and the Players Union were trying to finalize their deal for a 2022 season and a new CBA. First, before I introduce our roundtable of guests to weigh in on this emergency situation, let's hear what Jeter had to say himself. He released a statement. Bruce Sherman, principal owner of the Marlins, released a statement. Rob Manfred, but we'll just go with what Jeter said first, right up here. Quote, "Today I am announcing that the Miami Marlins and I are officially ending our relationship, and I will no longer serve as CEO nor as a shareholder in the club. We had a vision 5 years ago to turn the Marlins franchise around, and as CEO, I have been proud to put my name and reputation on the line to make our plan a reality. Through hard work, trust, and accountability, we transformed every aspect of the franchise, reshaping the workforce and developing a long-term strategic plan for success." But here's the money line right here. That said, the vision for the future of the franchise is different than the one I signed up for to lead. Now is the right time for me to step aside as a new season begins. So that is what we're going to dive into as this show goes on, just to look at all the ramifications this has on the Marlins franchise, as the guy that I considered the face of the franchise, even more so than any of the players, is stepping out even before we have a new CBA, a new 2022 season. To go around here up top, I wanted to give everybody a shot just to, on a scale of 1 to 10, to tell us how surprised are you by this news of Derek Jeter stepping away. We knew from the beginning he had this 5-year plan, a 5-year deal, literally, to be the CEO and oversee both business and baseball operations. Starting with you, Kevin, on a scale of 1 to 10, your level of surprise about Jeter leaving now. With 1, just to put this in perspective for everybody, 1 out of 10, like a Giancarlo Stanton home run, a 10 out of 10, something that you could have never imagined, a Magneuris Sierra home run. Where do you fall on your level of surprise? I think I know by looking at your reactions in our group chat today, but let's hear it.
Yeah, this is an easy 10. It's just another way to say it. This was absolutely unexpected, in my opinion, at least, because no one expected Jeter to step down. Maybe after the next season, when his contract was over, they wouldn't renew it and he would stay as a shareholder, as we were talking about off camera. But yeah, this is an easy 10. There's no way this was expected today, especially today when the labor negotiations were expected to have a big result or a really bad one at the same time.
And going right down the line, Isaac, also of Fish Stripes. You know him and Kevin from both hosting Fish Stripes Unfiltered. Same goes to you. Scale of 1 to 10, you're just level of surprise by Jeter being gone before this rebuild really turned around.
I'm going to have to go with a 6.5. It's pretty shocked, so like on the more shocked side than not. But the only reason it's not closer to a 9 or a 10 is just, this question had been floated around, because obviously I would say the first 4 years have been somewhat of a failure. If you take away 2020, I think that's sort of, an iffy situation. But the question had been brought up whether, if year 5 was also underwhelming, it wasn't a guarantee that Jeter would come back. And so that, to go along with all the other factors, including the collective bargaining agreement and the ownership and just the way that's playing out with the owners and the commissioner, again, so far apart with the players on so many core issues, it wasn't a complete shock. Obviously, it was a 6.5 nonetheless for me, but I'm going to keep it at that number because I was a little bit flabbergasted, to say the least.
Alex Carver of Fish on the Farm, who earlier today hosted a very insightful Twitter Spaces session on this topic, and he has an article coming for his website as well, fishonthefarm.com. A frequent collaborator with us at Fish Stripes. 1 to 10, Alex, what is your level of surprise about Jeter being out as CEO?
Well, first of all, thanks, Eli and Isaac and all you guys and Kevin as well, Daniel, Noah behind the scenes. Thank you for having me on again. I apologize for my voice. I was just gone for the weekend and had a little bit of fun. And then I got in my car to drive home today and I see this news. So I definitely agree with Isaac that it is very surprising given the timing You'd figure, if situations were different with the CBA and everything else, that he would live out the last year of that contract. But apparently there's some friction there. I'm sure we're probably going to talk about that. I would give you my number. I would say 6. Honestly, Derek Jeter did a lot for this organization. He really did. He turned the farm system around from what it was in the Laurier era, really tried to build it up. And now he's feeling the pressure and he wants to spend money. And there seems to be questions around, what kind of spending they're going to do, especially now with the CBA. So, we're going to talk about it. It's a former player that sides more with the players than the owners. Maybe there's a little disconnect between him and Sherman. Apparently there is, because this is a very odd time for him to do this. So timing would be a 10, but overall him stepping down, taking the timing out of the equation, or put them both together, I would say my number would be a 6.
And Daniel Rodriguez, let's hear from you as well on your level of surprise about this. Shocker.
I would have to go, you mentioned a 10 being a Magneto Sierra home run. This is probably Jesus Aguilar stolen base. So it's probably around an 8. I will give it around an 8. Obviously, the timing is not ideal. Given, now they're, during labor negotiations and everything that's been going on, even behind the scenes. But I feel like this is something that's bound to happen. Specifically like Alex and everyone else mentioned, that the timing is not the best, but I think it was going to happen. I think I would have given it probably maybe 2 more years. I think he would have done these 5 years, and then they probably would give it to him maybe a 1-year extension just to see how everything was going to end up playing out, especially with these big money contracts that they gave to Sandy Alcantara and Avisael Garcia, his big contract, and then trading big prospects like Cameron Meisner to get guys like Joey Wendell. This was obviously kind of in the moment to win now, and that's where Jeter's mindset is, where I think it's at. It's that win now mode. But I think, the other people in the front office, Bruce Sherman, have different ideas on where to take the franchise. I think they probably want to do it more, maybe wait a couple more years rather than Jeter's mentality of maybe winning now. But it's an 8 for me. It's a Jesus Aguilar stolen base.
It's a decent analogy. I think I have the perfect analogy for this. I have it as a Lewis Brinson home run. The grand scheme of things seemed unlikely with just the way that we know of baseball overall, and that baseball right now, it's hard to believe right now, but this sport was about as healthy as it had been prior to this lockout in terms of the revenue side of it, in terms of being a safe investment when he bought into this in 2017. That's really the big reason he did it. Even more so than his competitive side. I think he just saw it as a no-brainer, profitable opportunity for reasons that we've discussed on Fish Stripes that were kind of outside the Marlins' control. These few years have not gone as planned. The pandemic having a huge role in pushing them off course, especially for a team that was in a vulnerable financial position to begin with, and in terms of drawing people back into the ballpark and getting those ratings up. It's pretty unlikely. So I'd have it at like an 8 out of 10. Where on some circumstances, it's not surprising at all when you get the perfect blend of circumstances, right? When you get in a Brinsanity run in August of 2021, then nothing really surprises you. You can see things, it all happening in this case, but under all things considered, pretty surprising at this particular time, just knowing how much this team was gearing up for a very competitive season with the moves that they made. I think across the board, we were relatively encouraged by what they were doing before the lockout to improve the team, to address some of the deficiencies that showed up last season, and to correct them, make adjustments. Also at a time where we know, like, moving forward, Major League Baseball seems to be eyeing an expanded postseason, where all of a sudden the bar doesn't need to be super high for you to make the playoffs on a consistent basis. With an organization that's built as much depth as they have, like this particular year had the opportunity to really swing the entire tone about this rebuild. Like, they had an opportunity to make the playoffs this year and set themselves up pretty well for the rest of the decade if everything lined up exactly the way they wanted to. And instead, you have him going out here. One thing that quickly emerged from this a few hours before we were recording is the conflicting reports out there about why exactly this happens. And so first, let's go to the tweets from the insiders, going away from just the statements and our own speculation, these kind of came out back to back. You know, Craig Mish, Miami Herald contributor, Swings and Misses host, Sports Grid host. He's kind of our go-to on a whole lot of Marlins news and rumors. And so he came out pretty quickly insisting that, echoing what Marlins leadership still remaining believes, that they are still going to follow up on what they were building before the lockout and be very aggressive in terms of trying to win this year. And that could mean mortgaging more of their farm system depth to fill more holes on the roster. So for people listening and not seeing, Mish's tweet was, "It is my understanding the Marlins ownership group remains fully committed to winning in 2022. That includes spending after the lockout is over." I'm not sure where the idea has come from that they're done, because that is certainly not the case from my understanding. Just 9 minutes later, Joel Sherman of the New York Post has connections with Jeter going back to the 90s. He serves as a national baseball reporter at this point, very well respected as well. His tweet heard Jeter believed going into the lockout that there would be another $10 to $15 million that the Marlins would spend on the 2022 roster, and that strategy evaporated. Nice word. During the lockout, it was central to Jeter's decision to leave as CEO. That last sentence. It was central to Jeter's decision to leave as CEO because that money to improve the roster has disappeared. Open it up to you guys. Who do you believe here? Who do you think is closer to the reality of the situation? Because these seem to be conflicting reports.
Well, to be sort of like a coward, I'm going to like believe both reports in a way, because I do believe that this ownership group is intent on winning in 2022. There's money to be made. There's expanded playoffs, like you mentioned. Marlins have a good opportunity to make the postseason if they just add one more guy there. Now, regarding Sherman's tweet, it could be, I don't know whether it's $10 to $15 million. That seems like sort of an insignificant number for Jeter to just leave as CEO. But I definitely believe that there was possibly some restriction on, Jeter's ability to spend money further after the lockout is completed. So in a way, to give sort of like a wussy answer, I would believe both of them to a certain extent.
Yeah, for me, I think when you have two reports like this, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I think when you look at them and you look really deep into, you see the middle between them. I think the truth is somewhere there. I think it's a little bit of what Mish said, and it has to do somewhat what Sherman said, because I think personally Jeter wants to win now. He comes from an organization that's always in win now mode, and he was ready for that rebuild, but I think he felt like this was to win now. But also, you have to go with what Mish said and concern the lockout, because the lockout, I believe played a big role into what the owners are doing now, changed their minds, and now they're going to almost against the players. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle between what Sherman and what Mish said.
Yeah, I have to agree here with Isaac and Daniel. It's just, you don't know where to really go. You could believe both sides, as the team really never spent much money during this Jeter era until now in 2022, where we see the signings of Offishial. We see they re-signed Sandy to a nice deal, as well as Miggy Rowe with the extension. Before that, their biggest contract was a 2-year, $17 million contract to Corey Dickerson. So you could believe Joel Sherman, and then you could believe Craig Mish. He's been saying this since the end of the 2021 season, towards that ending, where they're trying to win now, that they thought that the 2021 team would win. Obviously didn't. And then you go into 2022 and they're trying to make these moves for win now. So you have to look at both sides here. And I think it's just best to look at it from the middle and just believe both at the moment. And what Isaac said is completely true. It's a little weird to see Jeter leaving over $10 to $15 million, because that's definitely not going to get you a Nick Castellanos, or won't get you a Kyle Schwarber. So that's something else to kind of think about there.
Yeah, I think Daniel had it. Yeah, I think Daniel had it correct. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I really don't think it's over that money figure. Again, that's kind of not too significant. Maybe if there was another zero attached to that somewhere, then maybe we're talking about something. But no, definitely. I think that there is truth to both. I don't think that the Marlins are done trying to be competitive when this lockout ends, whenever that is. But I said it before, and it comes down. It honestly comes down to what's going on right now at Roger Dean Chevrolet Stadium, and it comes down to the fact that baseball owners, probably including Bruce Sherman, are okay with losing a month's worth of games. And that hurts the pocket. I mean, even though we have this naming rights deal and the stadium naming rights and everything else that's added revenue, baseball teams make the most money when games are being televised, number one. The games have to be televised or your TV deal doesn't mean anything. And when fans are in the park. So that's where the most money is made. And when that's not happening, it's going to hurt the pocket of a majority owner in Bruce Sherman, who owns 96% of this franchise. And now 100%, depending on who Jeter sold the share to. I'm guessing it's probably back to Bruce. Anyways, that's what I'm saying is that there's lost money here. And Sherman is okay with that. Jeter is not. He's being championed by players that are in the MLBPA on Twitter for walking away like this. Miguel Rojas, Francisco Lindor. There was just somebody else that did the same thing. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's disconnect between a natural player, a natural baseball player. That's what he was first and foremost. That's how he made his living. He came into this role very uneducated about how to run a team. You can be the best baseball player in the world, and Jeter was one of them in his time. And you could be the worst owner, the worst CEO, whatever it may be. I'm not saying Jeter was the worst. He definitely wasn't. But there were things he didn't know. And I think we saw that throughout his tenure here, given that he was the guy on the forefront, him as well as Denbo, that were really making the decisions ahead of Kim Ng. That's going to change now. So, yeah, I honestly, to answer this question, I really think it's somewhere in the middle, but I definitely think the money is definitely a factor. Jeter felt the pressure. This was going to be his last year. If 2022 wasn't a winner, he was going to be gone, honestly. And it was going to be it. So he felt the pressure and he got out now. And that's all I can say.
And two things to keep in mind: that $10 to $15 million, that's for the 2022 season. So that's not just like one lump sum. That's something that you wanted to spend annually for the next whatever player it was.
Yeah, to put some faces on that number. I mean, that's basically what Ketel Marte possible trade target was due to earn this season.
Exactly.
That's even though you think of names like Kyle Schwarber and Nick Castellanos being above that. You do a backloaded contract, where the cheapest salary is at the front of it. It's possible to get one of those guys in town for that amount of money in 2022 before it spikes up afterwards. That is a substantial amount of money. It's been tough to follow because of the lockout, obviously, but despite the flurry of moves that came before it, right now projected payroll for the Marlins next year is less than $70 million. It's 27 out of 30. They still have even with their moves, even with Stallings, even with Offishial Garcia and Joey Wendell, and to this point, not trading away any of the veteran starting pitchers yet. They're still one of the lowest payroll teams. It's still a payroll that during the Miami era, since they moved into the new stadium, it's kind of less than what they've spent in a lot of previous seasons. There is a lot of room to continue adding, especially with the new TV deal, especially with the naming rights. With that said, there's that's kind of negated by this looming continuing lockout, by the fact that at this point, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that by the time we're done recording and posting this, there's going to be no new deal. And for people that haven't been following the ins and outs of this is the last day that these sides are meeting in person in Jupiter. They're going to take a break afterwards. There's no immediate resolution to this lockout unless they somehow miraculously bridge their differences tonight. It's going to be a while, with reportedly owners willing to sacrifice as much as 1 month of the season to get players to cave to their demands. There's no resolution in sight, even though they've spent so much time face to face in terms of how much genuine effort there's been on the owner side to try to get something done. It's looking like a lot of this was done in bad faith. One thing I want to bring up is because today we were really excited to see this resolution of the talks potentially. That was the big story entering today. This is my speculation, is that the exact timing of this was done, even though it's a huge story, even outside of Miami, that Derek Jeter and the Marlins have parted ways and that he's gone as CEO. This could have been a much bigger story if it didn't happen to be on the exact same time in the middle of the bargaining between the owners and the players. Don't you guys think that this was done very, very intentionally, that on this particular day, it was to actually deflect as much attention as possible, because knowing that everybody was supposed to be transfixed on the bigger league-wide situation going on right now?
I mean, I can first time. Go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
I was just going to say, not to play devil's advocate to you, Eli, maybe it's intentional. And that's my thing, that maybe it's done intentionally to show that, hey, I'm not an owner. I don't stand with owners. I stand with players, and that's who I am. That's it. Could be a stretch, honestly. It honestly could be. It could be exactly what you're saying, that he doesn't want the attention. He doesn't want to make a big deal. He doesn't want the media world on him. It's going to happen anyway. It's Derek Jeter. It's one of the biggest names in baseball history. He's going to have attention no matter what, and he knows that, and everybody else knows that. So, is it saying I stand with players and not owners? I don't think so. I honestly don't think that. That was just my devil's advocate, getting out of the way. I don't think that. I really don't think anybody expected the deal to be done today, honestly. So was this as grand of a day as everybody expected with this deadline? I think most educated fans and educated people that are following the situation, they know that baseball wasn't coming to an agreement today. They honestly know, and we all know, right? The big thing was that they're willing to give up a month. That hurts, and that, like I said before, that will definitely hurt the pockets of owners, especially small market teams. So, like I said, Jeter looking at that, he's like, okay, there's going to be money issues, whether it's 10 to 15 million or whatever the dollar figure is. There will be money issues, definitely, from this. And both him and Sherman know that exact fact. So he probably looked at it and said, can I get done what I need to get done to save face here after everything that's happened in the last 4 years? And he went out on his own terms because clearly he didn't think so. So that's where I think it is. I don't think it's either him trying to deflect or create attention. I just think that with the way the agreements and the lack of agreement has gone, I should say, I think he thought it was his time to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and some breaking news, I guess. It says the MLBPA has organized a fully staffed stadium and facility for players to train in Mesa, Arizona, according to sources familiar with the situation. So I guess we could say it kind of seems like there's not going to be an agreement at all. So,
Eli, to answer your question, what was this done today to sort of maybe like take away some attention? I think for the first time as CEO, Derek Jeter was given good PR advice and said, you know what, there's all this crap going on, all this shitty stuff going on to Major League Baseball, and the Marlins included. And if you do it today on a day where literally all of Major League Baseball outlets are not going to be focusing too much on it, you can do it today, and maybe it was good timing on his part. I don't know. I don't know what's going on through his head, but that's something to keep in mind, that he possibly did know that, let's say, if he had done this a month ago, he would have maybe been looked at a little bit, more closely. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Right. One other thing that I did bring up on Alex's Twitter Spaces is that this day also potentially just being the clearest indication yet that he was at a dead end almost. This being year 5 of this rebuild, and he had high hopes for it. Even so, maybe it's true what Joel Sherman and other New York-based Jeter insiders are saying, that he felt he wasn't going to be given the money to spend enough and improve the team on the other side of the lockout. Whether that particular thing is true or not, what's clear is that whenever they do get this lockout resolved, it's going to be a very rushed end to the offseason. And for a team that we know is at least 1 or 2 significant pieces away from putting together this playoff contending team, that really rushes the process for you to make important moves, and potentially means that you have to wait on those moves until the middle of the season, where it might just not be feasible to bring in, to negotiate those trades or those free agent signings and get your entire team ready for the season, with that being different than they'd planned at the outset of the offseason, kind of hoping to be able to make rational decisions, knowing how important they were. So when you combine that with the fact that fans are really, really pissed off with how this has gone, and you don't know exactly whether the revenue, even when the season gets started, what's that revenue going to look like? I mean, for one, you're not getting as much money from the TV partner as you were expecting with fewer games. Also, timing of it, this is something that I guess Alex will appreciate, is that we know in this market, there's other significant sports teams that are going to be playing playoff games in May and potentially in June. Both the Florida Panthers and potentially the Miami Heat. Both of those teams are going to take away some of the oxygen. I think Kevin can appreciate this too, because he follows all the sports teams in this market very closely. Those teams take the oxygen out of the room. If you're going to focus on playoff hockey and playoff basketball over early season baseball, I think a lot of people would do that. That could mean less people coming to the games, at the start of the season, less people watching at home, just all these other revenue streams just not paying off the way you thought it would. If people don't even realize that the season gets started, whenever it does get started, if that's April 15th or May 1st or May 15th or stuff like that. What do you think about that idea, Kevin? As somebody personally that I know is a fan of the other teams in this market, do you think that's going to, whenever the season does get started, like, is that something that may have scared Jeter away, may have frustrated him, that at this particular time, they really need to get the season going on March 31st, and waiting later in the year, they're going to be like the little brothers to those other teams in this market that have actual championship aspirations.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you look at the Heat and the Panthers right now. They're at the top of the world. The Heat currently sit at number 1. The Panthers at the number 1 seed. These teams are pretty much bound to make the playoffs. They'll probably clinch it in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And no one's going to want to watch, no offense to the Marlins, but they're not going to want to watch a 4th or 3rd seeded team lose games at Lone Depot Park. You'd rather watch a team like the Miami Heat or the Florida Panthers go out than probably win an NBA championship or the Stanley Cup. I mean, that's just how it is, and definitely would have scared Jeter away, looking how successful those two teams have been. And you look at the Marlins, they're, like you said, the younger brother. There's just another way to say it. So, I mean, that's just how I see it. If it were me, I'd rather be watching the Miami Heat win some playoff games against, who knows, the Milwaukee Bucks or the Brooklyn Nets than the Miami Marlins playing the Pittsburgh Pirates in Miami in the opening day or whatever it would be, in the future.
So you're letting me know that if any Marlins home games fall on the same day as those playoff games, you don't want credentials for those Marlins games, right?
Oh, no. That's a different thing, obviously. But you know me, I love my Miami Heat. But when you look at it from the money standpoint, I think you got to look at it like that these teams are going to be in the middle of a playoff chase. They're going to be in the middle, not even a playoff chase, NBA Finals chase. Be the best team in the league, and you're going to want to watch the Miami Marlins begin off the season. After that, I mean, I think we would all be watching Miami Marlins baseball, since it's the only thing we have. The Dolphins aren't that good right now, and not even that. Let's say the Marlins bring in a Castellanos after the lockout. That'll want to make people want to watch the Marlins even more, maybe even more than the Heat, especially people that want to get into baseball a lot more. You seen your Castellanos for the Marlins, Sandy re-signed. It makes a lot of sense to watch the Marlins, especially this season coming up. Looks like they're going to be competitive, but when you look at it with the money and this TV deal, as you were mentioning, Eli, I think people are going to want to watch the Florida Panthers and the Miami Heat, especially the Panthers with how good they've been this season and how impressive.
In years past, Eli is absolutely right. In April and May, the Marlins, well, especially in April, the Marlins really do own it for a little bit. There's a picture of Jeter and the captain. But in years past, in May and June, you're right, Kevin. People they're at Marlins Park, they're at Lone Depot Park, but they're at the bar watching the Heat game. I've unfortunately been there watching that, and I hear a big roar of the crowd. Oh, did Brinson hit a double? Oh no, it's it's Tyler Hero doing something on the court.
Yeah,
but yeah, that happens even when under normal circumstances, like in 2018 and 2019, and even when Stanton was chasing Roger Maris, even when Jose was pitching every 5th day in 2016, fans were at the bar behind home plate watching the other sport teams, especially during the playoff runs. And even during the regular season, same thing. And then later in the season, in September, you're starting to watch fans not show up on Sundays because of the Dolphins. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. It's a great point brought up by all of you guys. It's just been a thing that David Sampson has gone on record, even when he was president, that they would really want Miami to be still relevant later, halfway through the season, at least, to sort of compete with the Miami Heat, who are always in the playoffs. Well, that's partly because in the NBA, everyone makes a freaking playoffs.
As much as we would like to, we want to see, as you mentioned, Jose and Stan, during those times, we would have liked to see, and people would go to the games. People care more about, actually winning games and making the playoffs. Mm-hmm. That's something the Marlins weren't able to do. And I think if you start doing that at a more consistent rate, or at least winning games, if they win 80 games, that is a huge plus. And that'll definitely want to make people come to the stadium. But you have to get the winning product, and that's something that we haven't seen. And that's something, for example, we can maybe do a podcast on this, comparing that to the Heat and the Panthers. The Heat and the Panthers have been able to do that at a consistent rate. I mean, we thought the Heat would rebuild after LeBron. That never happened. They actually stayed pretty consistent. So something else to look at there, I would say, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think the Marlins have won 81 games since 2009, if I'm not mistaken.
You guys know as well as me, Isaac and Kevin, especially since you guys grew up here like me, this market cares about one thing: winning games. If you're winning games, they show up. If you're not winning games, they're not showing up. I had Panther season tickets for years, and they made the playoffs in one of the 6 seasons that I had season tickets, and nobody went. It's the same exact way with the Miami Heat. If they're not winning, nobody's going to go. It's the same way with the Marlins, and people are so disconnected from the Marlins because of how long they've lost for, excluding 2020. So when Derek Jeter came here, this guy's a proven winner. Obviously, past the New York connection and everything else, that is what it is too, and that was also attractive. But, man, this guy knows how to win. He won on the field. He's done it before. What he didn't do is win as a CEO, and that's much different than winning as a baseball player. And I think that's what you saw in his tenure is just the ability to do certain things, but completely lost on other things. And I think that that's evident in roster construction. That's evident in other things that he has done here. Not all bad, but definitely not all great. So I think it's just proof that winning on the field is different than winning in the front office, for sure.
Who do you think is having the best day as a result of this? I think David Sampson is the one
You
that's
had
taking
to do
the biggest
it.
victory.
One of the first things I thought of was David Sampson is going to be having himself the day after.
Yeah, for people that aren't familiar, it seems like if you're on Twitter, people know this, but for the larger crowd, David Sampson has a pretty popular podcast with CBS called Nothing Personal, where he talks all things sports, business, etc. He has a microphone in front of his face all the time. He took the job almost as soon as Jeter fired him. He's been bitter about being let go from the very moment it happens. He has not tried to hide from that. He's embraced it. He has rooted against Jeter. He has trash talked the way that Jeter ran the team from the very beginning, including some of the things that he did at the very beginning of his tenure that deserved to be ripped. He had Jeter from the beginning was on this path to totally disassociate the franchise from everything that happens under Jeffrey Loria and David Sampson. That was the one common theme. A lot of it was about trying to emulate what the Yankees do. I'd say even more of it was just about to get as far away as possible from the distressed franchise that he took over, and kind of seeing that everything that happened before him was bad in a certain way, and trying to change that. And so that's like a more complex conversation just for people that are only listening. David Sampson, I don't know if all this is accurate, but this is just to give you his perspective. He says, quote, revenue never close to projections, and that is why payroll stayed low. Marlins lost significant money each year he was in charge. Owners were tired of putting money in and letting Jeter run the show with no input, and value of the team has not increased. I mean, just as a first glance at that, it's hard to disagree with that, right? That does seem pretty on the money.
Yeah. You know, we talk about everything that he goes on. He goes on Levitard once a week, and every chance he gets, you're right, he bashes this current regime, whether he's correct or whether he's not. A lot of it, honestly, has been correct, unfortunately. But the thing that you mentioned, he was just the first thing that Jeter wanted to do is just separate himself from the former regime in so many ways, changing the way the stadium looked and really firing every single significant person that was working for the front office. It was just, I thought that was just so unnecessary for a myriad of reasons. But
and not only that, he got rid of the 03, a lot of the Florida Marlins stuff. Like Jeff Conine gets rid of him. Like, oh, there it is. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, Jeff Conine. He got, who was it?
Andre Dawson, Tony Perez, Jack McKeon, Jeff Conine. They were all advisors to the team. Got rid of all of them. Not super expensive advisors either. Just voices in that front office, and I think across the board, all guys that are pretty widely respected, especially Jack and Conine, who at the very beginning, it's kind of unquestionable some of the mistakes that were made during that first offseason, both from a tactical standpoint and just that unpopular PR. The one thing we got from that first offseason was Sandy Alcantara in trade, but I mean, almost everything else, both on in terms of player transactions and other miscellaneous things, it was rough offseason that year. So yeah, it's that kind of moves to the point where we want to try to predict exactly where this franchise goes from here. Jeter, even as somebody that had that big title and was pretty seriously involved in baseball transactions and a little bit on the business side as well, there's still pretty big voices inside the organization that I think the early speculation is that they'll kind of fill the void internally in some respects, while also probably bringing in one other new executive, likely on the business side, but it's a big opportunity for Kim Ng. The early reports from Mish, from Peter Gammons of The Athletic as well, is that she is going to be trusted even more like unconditionally with a lot of the moves that the team makes on the other side of this lockout and beyond. For somebody that has only had one full season as a general manager with decades of other front office experience prior to that. But now I wonder if they'll even change her title. Maybe it might still just be a super general manager instead of like a totally new title. I wanted to go to Alex here first, though, about Kim Ng, because you and I, we disagree on a number of things, but I think we did have a mutual frustration with how the front office operated last year on a variety of fronts, from negotiating with major league free agents to also how they just managed the 40-man roster, handling the developments of some of their key prospects in terms of what levels they were playing at, and all of it. How comfortable are we with the idea that Kim Ng, for somebody that coming off what was an uneven first year on the front office side, could suddenly now be even more directly responsible for making these critical moves in 2022?
Yeah, and we completely agree on last season's roster construction was an absolute disaster. Just no getting around it. And I've been very vocal with you on that. Horrible. I'm intrigued by that, and I'm kind of looking forward to what Kim does. I mean, you bring her into this role that she was obviously ready for from all of her expertise. The thing that I always go back to is that, before she came to the Marlins, it was big market. It was big market Yankees, Dodgers, White Sox, all these big market teams that she was in charge of, or at least in a position of power in. And then she comes to the Marlins, and it's much different running a small market team. So last year she gets her first taste of running the small market team. And now we know that she wasn't really making final decisions. It really wasn't. It was Derek Jeter and Gary Denbo, both of whom I believe, at least so far for Denbo, and at least in some regard for Derek Jeter, were not good in talent evaluation, number one, and honestly knowing when this guy is ready without trying to overprotect the player. And then they do things that we've talked about multiple times, Eli, like they'll call up Lewin Diaz to sit him on the bench, and they call up Jose Devers to sit him on the bench, and then he goes down with a season-ending injury. Everything they did with Nick Neidert and Braxton Garrett, yeah, you got to plug holes, but, you have to protect the prospect's development. And when a prospect is ready, you need to know when that prospect is ready, and you need to make room for them if you have long-term plans. So everything together, I am excited, honestly, to see what Kim does in a greater position of power. She has the expertise. She's ready to take the reins more than she had last year. And I would honestly love to have been like fly on the wall in between when Kim says, hey, I think this guy's ready to come up, like a Bryson Brigman. And then they say, nah, he's not ready defensively. You know what I mean? So those would have been fun conversations to hear exactly where she is on certain prospects. She hasn't been able to be vocal on that. So I'm really honestly intrigued to see where she is on certain prospects, how this opening day roster looks whenever it shakes out, and how roster movement looks in 2022 and beyond. I think she's definitely ready for that challenge. May she have some hiccups in the road? Yep, yes, definitely. Like we saw last year, as you said, she obviously still had input. She still had, a voice, but there were two other voices over her that if they weren't for it, it wasn't happening. So now she has that leeway, that freedom. Right. I'm really excited to see how that goes and how she handles it.
Holloway's another guy who they kept calling up and down, where he needed to be a staple in the bullpen, or preferably in the bullpen. But that was another guy, another prospect, quote unquote, that they just did not keep in one place.
And something else to mention when you talk about the roster construction is the Marlins were with three pitchers throughout the whole season, and you couldn't have kept Nick Neidert and Braxton Garrett in the rotation at a consistent rate, which is something that just annoyed me a lot, that they would up and down, up and down. You're not going to have a consistent player giving you good quality starts if you're going to bring them up and down this whole season. The last straw for me was when they didn't bring up Bryson Brigman and they kept playing Isan Diaz consistently. That for me was just like, all right, they don't really care a lot about this roster construction and the movement of, minor leaguers up and down, because Bryson Brigman is 100% ready to be a major leaguer. He proved it. And the excuse of saying it's the defense it's 100% BS. I don't believe that at all, because we've seen the clips of this guy just make some of the best defensive plays in the minor leagues this season, at least in Jacksonville. So yeah, I really am excited to see what Kim Ng could do, because she says this player's ready, as Alex mentioned. Bring him up. And now she has the chance to do that, as she will have a lot more, I guess, leeway into the decisions. She'll have more powers, as many say. So I'm excited. And she said they weren't done. She herself said it at the press conference introducing Offishial that they weren't done. So
right,
better not be done.
That was 3 months ago, and that is the interesting question here. It was 3 months ago. It was even though the lockout was inevitable at that point, I think even somebody like myself who was a pessimist, I was expecting that they would be able to find some common ground before the start of the season, that we'd still get a full-length season, which at this point seems essentially out the door. So things have changed, and as we mentioned before, the revenue that this team, their honest revenue projections for this franchise, if they're being realistic, might not be what they originally thought they would for this upcoming season in terms of how much ammunition financially they have to work with. It's just a fascinating, for now, who to believe between Jeter and between Bruce Sherman. With Sherman, I think from the beginning, he entered as the primary financer of this ownership group. For full transparency, people knew that his pockets weren't quite as deep as the other billionaires. I don't like to defend billionaires, but I think people accepted that when he bought the team, this was a guy that would spend frugally and responsibly and efficiently. So the reality of the lockout's impact on what this team could realistically expect to make in terms of revenue, that he's not going to put money into the team unless he knows that the money is coming in. I think Kim was fighting against that last offseason. When we talked about last offseason, how they ended up making some moves that we liked, but settling for Adam Duvall when they wanted to go after outfielders last offseason that were more well-rounded everyday players, in terms of getting Anthony Bass as their big bullpen acquisition. And we know they could have chopped in like a higher price range to fill that need as well. Like the impact, this doesn't necessarily all go away just because Jeter is gone. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say on your point, and I think you're exactly right. But I would say, you're looking at owners as owners, and you said it yourself that Bruce Sherman isn't not the richest guy in baseball and not the richest guy in the world. He has money, yeah, for sure. He's a billionaire, like you said, but there are much more lucrative owners and people around this league than Bruce Sherman. So it boggles my mind to think that Bruce is sitting there and looking at a month's worth of revenue loss, and he's okay with that, because the more games that this team loses and smaller market teams like the Marlins lose, the more you're not going to be able to sign players that are going to make you win right now. And you're looking at Adam Duvall's and Anthony Bass's and those kind of players. And people are going to show up for that. And we saw it this past season, and then they traded Duvall on top of it. So, it's just crazy to think that Bruce Sherman is sitting there as an owner and saying, hey, I'm cool with losing a month's worth of television money and with no fans at the park and no concessions and everything else. It really is crazy to think about that, because like you said, and like I've said, that's where owners make money. And when that's not happening, smaller market teams are the ones that hurt a lot more than big market teams. And obviously the Marlins are very small market teams. So if we lose a month's worth of games, Eli, honestly, and all of you guys, I would say that what they're going to sign, unless they have a sudden influx of money, unless he sells a portion of the team and another owner comes in and is willing to spend on this product, I really don't think we're going to expect any huge big name signings. That's just an opinion.
Yeah. And to be fair, Adam Duvall did work out for Miami. We're done. It wasn't a good decision to trade him, but he did work out.
Yeah, people didn't show up to see Duvall, then they're definitely not going to show up to see Alex Jackson.
Oh no, 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's fair. Something that I brought up to Alex on his Faces session that I wanted to reiterate here for our audience is my expectation that in the immediate term we might not see a whole lot of other people within the Yankees organization, within the Marlins organization, follow Jeter out the door. I don't know if there's necessarily going to be a whole lot of turnover in player development and in the front office right away, especially on the minor league side. For all the chaos going around at the major league level, the minor league season is going to progress as normal, just without 40-man roster players for the time being. All those affiliates are going to play full-length seasons, and a lot of those player development people, from Gary Denbo all the way down to some of their minor league managers and their well-regarded pitching instructors, a lot of those people actually had Yankees ties and were brought in by Jeter and by Denbo to like help shape up this minor league system, which was in terrible shape in all regards when the ownership change happened. But because it's going to be a full minor league season, and at this stage in the offseason, again, what made the news so stunning is that it came right now at the last day of February, highly unusual. So if people leave those positions, there are not open spots with other organizations right now. I don't think there are going to be these people are going to like forego their salaries for the 2022 season just because Jeter left. They could have all the respect in the world for Jeter, but just because Jeter brought them in and gave them opportunities they didn't have before, they don't necessarily have to reciprocate that loyalty by walking out and leaving the team in a bad spot that way. So for the moment, the farm system is in an interesting place, which we'll talk about in like a future unrelated episode. I want to wind this one down. It's just for the time being, in what is a very critical year on the development side, to integrate a lot of their recent draft picks and some of the other prospects that they've traded for. This is a time where they can kind of reestablish themselves as an elite farm system after potentially taking a dip last year because of a lot of the graduations that they had to the major league level. I think for the moment, that, as weird as it sounds, because Jeter being the most recognizable guy attached to the Marlins organization, the immediate impact, I don't expect there to be a whole much to do with it, because at the major league level, when you have Kim Ng kind of stepping into those responsibilities as leading baseball operations, and with the minor league season set to go and no other places to go for all the player development people in there, I think at least initially we're not going to feel that much of a difference with him gone. That's just my speculation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, minor league season's around the corner. It doesn't really make sense to start firing people from the minor leagues. I would say maybe next season, the next minor league season. And I think we spoke about this in Alex's Spaces, that Gary Denbo, obviously, I think he's gone, but not this season coming up. Definitely the next one after there's a new CEO, it's established, but, you know, all that. And maybe we'll be seeing some more firings when it comes to the hitting side of the minor leagues, because the pitching looks great. I mean, Max Meyer, Yuri, Antonio Velez, who I've actually looked into a lot more after the articles that I've seen you got on Fish on the Farm. So that's something definitely to look at there when it comes to hitting. I want to see changes to hitting, because JJ Bleday wasn't that good hitting. Connor Scott got traded because he just wasn't that good hitting, for example. I mean, if we could see an improvement when it comes to the hitting standpoint, then there's a case to say, okay, maybe not fire everyone, but we have to get rid of some guys.
Something that
Kevin's right. I mean, the one guy that has to be protected if he can be at all costs is DJ Svalek. Svalek needs to be here. I mean, I can't imagine, after everything that he's done with every draft that he's run, most of which have been spectacular, that guy's phenomenal. And he's great at picking out talent in the later rounds as well. He's great after the draft and signing guys like Paul McIntosh, who was an undrafted free agent who had a great showing in Jupiter. So honestly, I really would hope that he is still here. Other guys, like you said, Eli, it's a huge year for Denbo. It's a huge year for other guys on that forefront. You can go down to guys like Hector Crespo and Jeff DeGrood. They answer for that gap in hitting as well. I mean, it's not just Gary Denbo. He's the main guy, but then there's other guys behind him that are working with him. And those are the guys who I think after, as you said on the Spaces, not right now, because the minor league spring training is starting in a couple days, and you're not going to jumble up everything and bring in a brand new bunch of guys right now. However, if we see another year like last year on the offensive side of the ball, there's going to be guys like Joe. And it's going to be very easy for a new CEO or whatever the title is to excuse those dismissals. So those are the guys that really should be feeling the hottest seat, I think, is on player development. And then as a secondary to that, and we can get into this at another time, and I got to wrap it up, is Don Mattingly. And that's all I got to say.
And just to reiterate your point really quick, all these, Hector Crespo, Jeff DeGroot, they're all promoted by Jeter just now. So you would think, they're going to at least make it through the season. And based on the performance of the minor league system through the 2022 year, I think then whoever is in charge, whether it's Kim Ng or whether it's just Sherman outright, I don't think it's going to be him. I don't think he even knows who these guys are. But, it'll be, someone like Kim Ng who will be making the decision to either get rid of a lot of them or keep them if they do well. But they were all just promoted by Derek Jeter himself. So I think that's like something that really coincided with the weird timing of it all.
I'll say one more thing before we get off the topic and you guys go. The Marlins have absolutely amazing people on the educational side, headed by Colleen Mitchell. Colleen Mitchell is spectacular. She heads up the education at the Dominican Academy. We just saw their last class come out that had 14 players, including Yuri Perez. They do amazing work. They just had obviously this brand new facility open. And even before that, like, this new facility is just going to make them even better. And it's going to be incredible what they do with these young Latin players. And then on top of that, Adrian Lorenzo, who earned his job to be where he is in international scouting. So, the international director. So yeah, there are people here that came here by way of Derek Jeter and are in the positions that they're in by way of Derek Jeter that honestly deserve it and should be there. And I don't think should have any part of being dismissed by this organization. So hopefully whoever takes over can blend their guys with Jeter's guys and we can make it come together. That's my wish.
I'm just kind of wrapping my mind around how different it's going to be covering a team that is not headed by Derek Jeter. It was an automatic. We were talking about the draft and the minor leaguers. Every single time the Marlins acquire a new young player, like in all those first interviews, the question is, have you spoken to Derek Jeter yet?
Yeah.
Was Derek Jeter your favorite player growing up? It's always yes, because he was the face of baseball for probably a decade and a half during most of his playing career. And one of my takes that I mentioned up top, I think a lot of people would agree with me, is that he's been the face of the Marlins for these 4.5 years too, just because they just haven't had any elite players. When they traded Stanton and Yelich and Ozuna and kind of in their void, they've had players that moving forward, I think, have that potential to really identify with a lot of people, in Jazz Chisholm and in Sandy Alcantara really being the two prime candidates. But Jeter was the headliner when you're talking about the Marlins, even for people living in South Florida, even people following the team locally. Like, he was the first guy you think of when you thought of the current iteration of the Marlins, just because of how profile he was during his career, how seemingly involved he was in a lot of these big baseball decisions in recent years. And whoever fills his shoes, my guess is that, again, they're going to mostly trust who they have on the baseball side and potentially bring in a new executive more on the business side, because that was kind of where the most tension was put into play here. It's not the struggles at the major league level were frustrating, but the fact that this is a team that they felt they bought for a pretty relatively low price by major league standards, and the franchise value probably hasn't gone up at all. If not, it's gone down since then. That they need help on the business side more than the baseball side. Whoever they bring in, you're not going to care about that person even a fraction as much as you cared about Derek Jeter, which means that in that void, to give the Marlins relevance, they got to win games. It's even more critical than ever before, that if you do not have that celebrity executive, you need to actually have the product that makes people care, makes people invest in what you're doing. We're going to have a whole lot to say on this subject. I thought we kept it really brief here, and yet it goes 55 minutes. So you know that there's just so many angles to cover here, especially if, worst case scenario, we got to wait a while for the start of the major league season. At the very least, we know minor league stuff is coming in just a matter of days. We get going with the spring training side of that. But so many ramifications of this move. Not necessarily all for the bad, though. Very mixed consequences potentially coming out of this. I think Kevin Barral, Isaac Azout, Alex Carver, a fish on the farm, for joining me. Ely Sussman here on the official show. I'll keep doing this podcast. We actually have a pretty interesting guest lined up for next week, and I'll be doing a lot of solo pods along the way to fill the time as we cover the Marlins in what could be a long lead up for the 2022 season. at least we finally have some good content to go into, to have some takes about. So we appreciate everybody listening. We appreciate you guys joining us. Subscribe to the pod wherever you get it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel too. We want to reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube as well, and we're inching in the right direction. For the people watching over there, thank you very much. I'm Ely Sussman. As always, go fish.